Please hold the line. We will answer your call as soon as possible.
Welcome to this edition of Please Hold. I'm Michael Schneider, founder and CEO of Service. Today, my guest is Jake Schwartz. Jake is one of the co-founders and the CEO of General Assembly, an awesome ed tech company that is now expanding worldwide. And Jake, I'm super happy to have you.
Glad to be here, Michael.
Thanks for the matching uniform too.
I wear this every single day.
So do I. I go through different shades of gray and decide which one makes the most
Based on
sense.
your feelings?
Yeah, I mean, I felt very vindicated because apparently Mark Zuckerberg has like 20 of the same t-shirt and just picks one. I spend a little bit more brain power because I have different shades of gray or black.
I went all black because my whole goal is just to diminish or decrease the amount of decisions that I have to make in the morning. And so I just have literally like 30 black t-shirts, and I just grab
same brand, same size.
I order them online. I don't have to think about it. But what's funny is even with the same black t-shirt, I end up having favorites because, like, they're the ones that are newer, that haven't lost their elasticity yet or anything like that. So
I don't understand how I go to American Apparel and I buy like 20 of the same t-shirt, and over a few months, some of them are a little bit softer, some of them are not as soft. Same washing machine, same detergent, whatever. But I also have preferences based on the subtle softness of my t-shirts. So I guess I'm still making decisions, even though the point is to not make
I think
decisions.
it's human.
It makes no sense. Cool. Well, let's dive into it. I have a bunch of questions for you. And my first one is about MBAs, because you're one of the only friends and CEOs and entrepreneurs that I know of that also went and got an MBA. As you know, education these days is frequently looked down upon. You have Thiel's program trying to convince people to drop out, and it's cool to drop out, go to Harvard, get accepted, but not finish, that kind of stuff. So you went the whole way and you got an MBA. Do you think that's been valuable? Would you do it again? Would you recommend other entrepreneurs get an MBA?
So I get this question a lot because this is, the business that we're in is, you could partially describe it as trying to kill the MBA. And so journalists love to ask me, but you got your MBA, so what's going on? And even I have employees inside GA who are saying, should I get an MBA? Like, what's the path that makes sense there? You talk bad about it, yet you have one. What's going on? And for me, it's a really difficult thing because on one hand, there is a path dependence that got me to this place where I think I'm pretty happy. I'm running a sizable company. We're doing well. And if I look back, I can't not credit my MBA experience with some of getting me to this place. And yet, whatever I did over the past, 25, 30 years of my life, I would have to credit in that same way. And so there's a path dependence that almost requires me to acknowledge and say, look, I got an MBA. It definitely didn't hurt in terms of my experience right now running a large company. It helps in numerous ways. As you get big and start to scale, a lot of the frameworks and disciplines that you get exposed to in an MBA, because an MBA is really just like a giant survey course of all the different frameworks and paradigms of thought around different parts of business. That's useful when you're dealing with complex problems that inevitably emerge as you start to be a larger organization. We're global now. We have a distributed workforce. We have over 700 employees. Whether it's marketing, it's operations, it's finance, like understanding enough to be dangerous in all those things is definitely helpful in my day-to-day life. On the other hand, if you were to ask me, was getting an MBA helpful in getting to the place where I was the founder of a company to start to get traction and raise a Series A, I think that's a much more complicated question because I think the MBA is really designed, and this is changing a little bit, but I think it's still the DNA of the MBA is all about basically training middle managers inside large corporations. That is how the curriculum was formed. That's the constituency of businesses that helped start MBAs and encourage their growth, that recruit out of those programs. And so there are good things like you understand about operations and optimization and capital management and the 4 P's of marketing and all these sort of basic frameworks. On the other hand, they don't teach a lot about hustle, sales, interpersonal relationships, decision-making dynamics under pressure. It's the human stuff that I think is much, much more impactful in those early stages of a business. Don't really get covered. And so
you recently got married. Maybe kids are in the future. If your kid one day comes to you and says, "Dad, I want to be an entrepreneur like you, and I want to go get an MBA first," do you say great, or do you say you don't need it?
Well, first off, I think that's going to be many years into the future. So, we're talking 20, 25 years. So my hope is that the world will have changed in many ways. Hopefully we'll have jetpacks and be floating around and talking about going, should I live on Mars or Earth should be the bigger decision. But, I think the advice that I would give, let's say, a nephew that's going to do this in 5 years, right, is the same advice I give to people all the time who are thinking about General Assembly, which is that, there's no educational program that's all good or all bad. There's no path that's all good or all bad. The best you can do is try to align your goals and work backwards from your goal end state and see if that path that we're talking about, if that educational program gets you closer to that path or further away from that.
Okay, fair enough. Were you in debt to go get your MBA?
I was lucky in that I did not have to bear that full financial burden.
Would that change the equation for you?
Oh, absolutely. And I think that's part of the advice I tend to give people all the time is that it's all about the investment and return, right? And so if you're going to, and by the way, even though I didn't go into debt, I would say that it cost a lot of money, right? The opportunity cost of the time is probably more than the money. I mean, I got a pretty big even scholarship, from Wharton when I went there, that covered a big chunk of my tuition. But the reality is that cost of the tuition is nothing compared to just 2 years out of work, and what happens in the MBA program is everybody's going on these cool trips and partying all the time, and you want to keep up with that. And so you burn a lot. Your burn rate in business school is quite high.
Yeah.
And so I think I encourage people with all education programs to think about the cost and think about the payback period of that investment. And I think what has made GA such an attractive option to so many people is that we have effectively squeezed the denominator, the cost equation down, not just because it's cheaper, but because it's shorter. And we've also increased the numerator, the return, by making it way more relevant. And so, the cool thing about math is you decrease the denominator, you increase the numerator, you can actually multiply the return by 10x.
Yep, that makes sense. I read this quote by you from last year in Bloomberg. You went to Yale for undergrad, and that you initially thought your degree was like a Harry Potter spell that could magically open any door for you. Was there a point when you realized that wasn't true, and that the stuff they don't teach in college, the street smarts, the hustle, the grit that it takes, was there a specific moment when you realized it wasn't like a magic spell, or has it been a magic spell? Oh
God, no. I mean, I use that story all the time because in some ways that oh shit moment that I had after Yale was it's pretty traumatic, actually. I grew up in Oregon. I grew up on a farm until I was 7, and I grew up in sort of this remote suburb of Portland. And the reality was, going to Yale, I thought I had made it. I thought I was done. I was entering the East Coast establishment. There were all these old buildings and fancy people.
What do you want to be in the establishment for? Screw the establishment.
Exactly. And and so, but I also was, I was a little bit, I wanted to be off the beaten path. And so when I was graduating from Yale, I didn't go do the investment banking or consulting. I thought that was for like, dweebs and tools and all that. And so I was like, screw that. I'm going to LA. I'm going to get in the music business. And they're going to super love the fact that I'm like, an Ivy League grad who also wants to be, creative and all that stuff. I mean, super naive.
So you felt your degree made you at that point like you were just the man because of the degree.
Unstoppable. Like I got it all, it hilarious, right? And so I get to LA, which is probably one of the scariest places to go through an epiphany that you don't have the proper tools to navigate the world, right? And quickly realized that it didn't mean anything, right? In LA, it really doesn't mean that much, right? Especially in showbiz. And especially in a dying industry like music, it was really bad. But the other thing was that I think I just didn't understand what I didn't know what I didn't know at that point. And as I started to learn more, I realized I didn't have any practical skills, right? I didn't really have a good, healthy model of how the working world worked. And because I had grown up, in Oregon and all that stuff, I didn't have like a family network I could rely on to help me sort of get through those first stages. And so I felt really lost and lonely. Like it was scary, right? I remember like driving around like in LA, listening to Radiohead, just kind of feeling like the whole world was this desolate wasteland and I was never going to amount to anything.
I do think LA, I say this all the time, as you know, I'm born and raised in LA and I have, I think, an unusual perspective. And it's a weird city because if I tell people I'm from LA, they usually say to me, "You're really from here?" And it's like, no one's from here. Everyone just comes here.
It's true.
But I do think it's one of the hardest cities in the world, even as a tourist, to come and just kind of figure out. I can't imagine as a puffed up Yale undergrad coming and expecting that to carry you. It must have been scary.
Oh, it was a mess. It was a mess. And so, then I went through this terrible journey, right? I literally moved home with my parents, to like reset. I like grew a beard. I moved all my old furniture out of my childhood bedroom, grew a beard, and sort of was like, lived like a monk. And I started to flail around, right? I did these, I took the LSAT, right? I was going to apply to law school. Was like my big plan for.
Wait a minute. So when your degree didn't get you where you wanted, you thought more degrees would get you where you want?
That's what you're taught, right? At that point, you're like, oh, I must need more of the same. It's like any addiction, right? You think the answer to the problems that have been caused by that addiction is more of the same, addiction. So, and I'm lucky. I count one of the luckiest things of my life is that I ended up figuring out that I shouldn't go to law school. We sometimes joke around GA that like our slogan underneath, GA should be saving people from law school since 2010. I
don't know very many I don't have very many friends that went to law school and are practicing law now that are super happy.
Well, the funny thing is there was a while where the conventional wisdom was go to law school. You can do anything with a law degree. Yeah. And I think a lot of that is the truth is that when you get a law degree, there's a lot of people who are willing to do anything else to not be a lawyer after that. So that's why it looks like you can do anything with a law degree is because they're so desperate to do it.
Because they want to get out.
Exactly.
So you mentioned music. And I think, I don't know what the scientific explanation is, but there's a lot of entrepreneurs that have backgrounds in music. I talked to Blake Irving, GoDaddy's CEO, last week, and behind him was a drum set. And there's like this weird correlation. I read that you play the violin, the fiddle. It's awesome. The guitar. What is that? Is that a creative outlet? Is it two different sides of your brain? Do you think it's the same side of your brain as being creative in business?
I actually do think music has an interesting correlation, and I think that there's two sides of it. First off, and they've done a lot of studies on this with early childhood development, that learning to play an instrument actually builds up your math reasoning, really, so your like logic side of your brain. But then as you continue to develop with it, it obviously also feeds the sort of creative side of your brain. Mm-hmm. And that was always the thing I loved about music is how it combines those two. So I was, in like college and even after, I was a songwriter. That was really my passion. And I've always thought that songwriting and entrepreneurship are very similar in a lot of ways because, with songs, pop songs especially, but really most of music, when you write music, there are pretty prescribed structures for how to write things, right? I mean, it's like every Beatles song, there's a verse, there's a chorus, there's a verse, there's a chorus, there's a bridge, there's a chorus, right? And there's some variations in there, but there's a structure there. And then there could be structure within that structure. And you sort of have to master that in order to really have your craft. But at the same time, without those sparks of inspiration and creativity, it ends up not being new. And that tension, I think, is very similar to the thought processes involved in starting a business, conceiving of a business, building out what that business could be, going through the process of making it sort of real. It's a very similar sort of, creative and structured journey that I find a lot of similarities.
Interesting. Yeah, I'm the least musically talented person I know, and I could never relate to that. But I think there's definitely a correlation because a lot of successful entrepreneurs and CEOs somehow have a music background or music interest. When you came to LA, you said you wanted to be in the music industry.
Mm-hmm.
What did you want to do?
Well, my dream was to be a record producer, right?
Just because that sounded cool and
I had gotten I wanted to be different than all my Yale classmates, right? And I was a songwriter and had gotten really into recording in the last couple of years of school. And I loved, again, you have this sort of I was deeply into the tech and to recording and the learning the skills underneath that, mm-hmm. And the creative expression that it enabled. And this was sort of at the time where digital recording was just starting to become accessible sort of to the prosumer level. And what's interesting is that's what led me to LA. What really sent me kicking and screaming from the music business was that same democratization of the means of production in music, right? All of a sudden you could buy a hard drive recording sort of multi-track machine, get good mics into a studio. Also, those same digital technologies were also enabling a complete democratization of distribution, which meant that the industry was kind of exploding at the same time. And not exploding in a good way.
You mean imploding?
Imploding. Maybe that's the better word, right? I have some, I remember going to...
What year was this?
This was 2001. Yeah. And so Napster was huge. I remember going to, one of the labels that was suing Napster and seeing just the rows and rows of empty cubicles everywhere. They were basically using them as storage things. I mean, because that business had been used to making so much money. And I think, I don't even know if it's ever really been recorded how dramatic the effect of Napster and sharing was to record sales. But I'm guessing it was a pretty big shock to the system right away.
Well, 2 or 3 years prior to that, I think they were the biggest they had ever been. And CD sales were on top of the world. And
those CD sales were just pure margin. Right? They were just it was just, and that's how they could afford all these A&R people running around. And that trickled down to, you can be a professional record producer, right? And just be a random schmo as a record producer. Yeah. Now it's a pretty special thing to be a successful record producer.
Yep.
But at the same time, almost anybody in their bedroom can be a record producer as well. And that's the interesting sort of dynamic in that market.
So let's talk about GA a bit. One of the unique things about General Assembly, I think, is just the amount of co-founders you started with.
Yeah.
I'm curious if you have any thoughts on that. Were there 4? Is that right?
Yeah. So GA really started as this project, it was around this idea of, wouldn't it be cool to have a space in the heart of Manhattan that was kind of a real community center for founders? Meaning it wasn't designed just to be sort of a VC exploitation space. It wasn't going to be funded by service providers like lawyers and accountants who wanted to go meet startups, but it was really about for founders by founders. And the idea just kind of kept gathering steam. But when we started, it was kind of this is going to be a project. It'll probably be cash flow positive because it involves real estate. It's relatively easy to get to cash flow positive at any point with just, as long as you do the right things. And so it seemed kind of more the merrier, more people to kind of do the work at the time. It wasn't designed to be a big company when we were founded. And in some ways, I
You
could
guys
say,
were all friends from before.
well, interestingly, we weren't. There were some friendships and sort of acquaintances that were in that, but we all had kind of coalesced in the 6 months previous to when we started the actual company. It was kind of crazy, the whole thing. But again, remember, it was just a project. It was all good, you know. And I will say that, like, I think you can say it was very, very difficult to make the transition from the project mode and the structure of those founders and all that kind of stuff to the company mode, and a VC funded company mode, in which all the things that made it so great as a project became really, really difficult obstacles when you're a VC backed company. And so on one end, I should say it's kind of like that path dependence thing. I could say, yeah, I mean, obviously, you know, if you're ever doing this deliberately, do not start a company with 4 founders. On the other hand, there might have been something in the magic of that, in the collaborative nature, in the sort of casualness with which we approached it, that allowed it to take the momentum that it did. And so, you know, when I start my next company, I definitely won't do that. But it's hard for me to say, oh, that was a huge mistake, right?
Sure. No, that makes total sense. And I mean, most successful companies are not started like companies. They're started like side things or side projects or whatever, and they become.
Which is just so interesting to me, right? Because it's just a weird thing that, like, it's almost like that magic comes from not thinking too far ahead. Mm-hmm. And yet, at the same time, when I look at entrepreneurs, one of the things I look for is, are they thinking far ahead?
I think it can be incredibly debilitating. Like if Steve Jobs in the beginning had said, I want to create something like the iPhone and sketched it all out in the late 70s, that was so daunting and impossible, it probably would have discouraged almost everybody. But when you start small and keep iterating, who knows what it can become?
That's true. I think, so here's my caveat to that idea, is that even their first product was a business. And I think sometimes, I mean, I think one of the things that made GA work was that even the first thing we did, even though it wasn't what eventually we became, it worked as a standalone business idea.
What's the difference between what you did then and what you're doing today?
Well, so we were a co-working business when we started. So we were really the first high-end co-working space for startups, right? And we had sexy furniture, we had great startups who came and worked here, we had a communal area, we had happy hours.
You were WeWork before WeWork.
Yeah, pretty much. And the different one was when I looked at that business, I said, wow, for us to grow, we would have to take on a lot more liability, right? A lot more leases. And these leases are expensive, and you got to sign personally on them, guaranteeing them. And, you know, it always seemed to me that, yes, we could keep going, but at some point the growth would stop. And when we did, that would hurt really, really bad because you're taking on so much liability.
Yeah. So where's GA today? You said earlier that it's something that people can do it instead of getting an MBA. Should people do GA instead of getting an undergrad degree? Like, are you trying to replace college or be a modern college?
So we don't ever say that. I don't like the undergrad thing. I believe is going through an evolution, but I think it's an evolution that's going to be 15, 20, 25 years of slowly changing. It is not something that you should go and try to kill. First off, I don't think that's fair to all the people who are still looking to college as a tool for social mobility, right? And so you have to be really conscious of that. It's like, what else? Richard Barth, who's the CEO of KIPP, is on our board, and he's got kids who are working really hard for the inner cities of where he has his charter schools, and their goal is to go to college. And are you going to tell them not to go to college?
But I get it, but is that an outdated way of thinking? You know, my parents always told me, my dad's a doctor, my mom's a teacher. I'm sorry, my dad's a lawyer, my mom's a teacher. And when I was growing up, the acceptable professions were doctor, lawyer, accountant, something like that. But the world's so different today. Like, do you think that's just an outdated thing that hasn't fully gone away, or
having your BA still means something. And so I'm not, it doesn't mean what it used to, and it should mean a lot less, but that's different than what is actually going on in the world for the vast majority of the world. So what I would say is I believe over the next 15, 20, 25 years, you will see a slow unbundling of the services and the value proposition that make up what we call college, right? And I would argue you're already seeing that. I mean, most of Americans don't attend college in the way that you and I probably attended it, by going to a 4-year place that's got great, lawns where you can play frisbee and keggers and all that kind of stuff. That's a very privileged level of college. Most people are working at night and on weekends to get their degree. And so you're already going to see those pressures driving that unbundling, and it's going to happen from all different angles, and it's going to be really interesting. But for us, we're much more focused on creating alternatives, and not even necessarily alternatives or substitutes, maybe just supplements to a grad school concept, right? And why I think it's such a great place for disruption is that grad school is one of those things you decide to go do, right? And you, the individual, makes the purchase decision based on what you want to do, based on your goals. And so it's much more direct, right? It's much more logical to say, hey, if we can have a better value proposition, we will be able to communicate to the right consumers in the market and get them to sort of change their behavior. When you get down to college, you have families, you have governments, you have societies sort of saying you should go to college. That's a much deeper and harder battle to fight. And I think it's one that we don't need to fight it. In fact, I think in some ways, I'm not sure that we should get rid of the liberal arts. I think we have to reformulate it. I think it should cost less. But I do think it adds a lot of value, and I'd be afraid of the world we live in if we didn't have the liberal arts as a core part of our educational system.
Yep.
We'd probably have a lot more Trump voters if that was the case.
We probably would. So I'm curious about your expansion. You started in New York. The number I saw, the most recent number, was you have 15 campuses now on 4 continents. Is that where you're at?
That's true, and we actually just announced that we're expanding that to 25.
Okay, so you're expanding like crazy. One thing I noticed is right now you're in all English-speaking markets. Are there plans to offer classes and education in other languages?
That's something we're playing around with. It was very deliberate. It's a good observation that we've only gone to English-speaking places because, part of my theory about when you're scaling your startup is you are going to have to change things as you want to grow and expand, but you should try to keep as many variables the same as possible. Because each variable that changes opens a whole new level of complexity. And I think that complexity grows exponentially, not linearly, with how many variables you change. And so you have to be very careful not to sort of get too ahead of your skis. So in the example of a different language, the minute we're teaching in a different language in a country that has a different language, it means that I would have to next, hire somebody who's bilingual, right? I would have to really deeply understand the cultural connotations to be able to have any input on creative advertising, on marketing, on curriculum.
Do you need to do it? I mean, English is still very much language of business. So on one hand, it's nice to be in the native language. On the other hand, maybe people that go to GA want to improve their English skills in addition to learning a skill. Do you think about it that way?
We've had those thoughts, but again, that's not what we know how to do well right now, right? And again, so that would be a new variable, right? How do you teach English at a professional level as part of your program?
Your MBA is coming out right now. You're being very pragmatic in terms of
I think you have to be pragmatic. I actually think the best entrepreneurs are all relatively pragmatic and all relatively risk averse. In that they don't like to take risks they don't fully understand and think they have better odds than average on.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, that's how I've approached growth at every stage of the way. Sometimes you got to play a little looser and you just got to sort of push the organization forward by doing some crazy things. But in general, I think you got to be very deliberate about how you grow, especially in those early days, because every decision will have ramifications.
So I was super impressed about a stat I read that 90% of your grads get a job in their chosen field within 90 days, and 95%.
Yes. More impressive. It's 99% within 180 days.
All right, so nearly everybody gets a job within 6 months of graduating from GA in their chosen field.
Yep.
That's A, very impressive, and B, uncommon, right? Like there's a lot of ways to improve your skills online. You can go to different courses. Like what makes GA kind of that special place where that stat is so high? And you guys talk a lot about your alumni network.
Yeah.
Does that play a part in it?
I think it does, but I think let's start from the fundamentals, which is that I think at some level I'm incredibly proud of what we've accomplished, but we've accomplished that by design, right? And there's a couple of ways of what I mean that. We are able to achieve that because we are teaching the right things in the right way by the right people, and by doing those things, we are able to then have people come out the other end with the right skills that they know in the right way that are attractive to employers, right? So we've basically, like everything in business, we've worked backwards from the goal, just like I talked about earlier. And so because of that, and by designing from the goal first and working backwards, or what we like to say is design with the end in mind, we were able to do something that has great, where those students essentially have great product market fit with the employment market. And that's great. And so it's a lot of work. There's a lot of moving pieces. There's not a single one thing that makes that work. It's the curriculum, it's the instructors, it's the staff, it's the admissions process, it's the partnerships we form with employers, it's our dialogues with employers, it's the fact that we iterate on our curriculum every single instance, so we're constantly being up to date. And it's also that we've now over time built this alumni network of people who come back and hire. But my hope over that alumni network is not just that that's what it does. I think the alumni network will in time be the most valued piece of what we've built at GA, because to me it's the thing that I look at and just marvel at every day. Now we have alumni who have started venture-backed companies or who have gotten promoted into mid-level and senior-level roles. We have alumni coming back and organizing events for us and fellow alumni. And I think we're still tapping the tip of the iceberg. I think there's so much more we can do with that. Especially because that alumni network is not just developers, it's UX designers, it's marketers, it's product managers. Like, you kind of have the full set of teammates right around you at all times.
It's almost like someone that's starting a company should just come and skim the top 3% of your class and just go start it with those people.
Yeah, absolutely. I think people have done that.
Smart.
Yeah.
So I need to ask a customer service question, because service is all about customer service. I was reading your FAQ, and it's super playful. You're saying you don't accept Diners Club. You don't offer day passes because you're not a theme park. I'm curious how you guys, do you deal with a lot of customer service, given that you're sort of like an educational institution at this point, and how do you approach it, and how does your kind of fun offbeat culture play into it?
So customer service is something I've been kind of obsessed with since we started GA, because one of the things that I hope we at GA are doing differently than most educational institutions is thinking of our students also as customers, right? And so for me, it means a lot that we treat them like a customer. Now, what makes it complicated is that when somebody's a student, in the context of them being a student, they're not always right. But in the context of being a customer, they are. And there is inevitable tensions that come from those two things, right? And that's been probably the thing that we've gotten better and better and better at figuring out how to navigate over the years. But we also, we have a big thing was making sure that we have great people at what we call the front lines, greeting people on the way in. We have, producers who monitor every single classroom and make sure that every student and every instructor is feeling supported in all the right ways. And I'm constantly looking for other ways to do that as well. I've spent time with Danny Meyer, with, other sort of big hospitality people trying to think about how else could we innovate around service in the education, which is frankly an area where not a lot of people have ever thought about service.
Well,
So
there is an inherent conflict that you said, which is just because I'm paying you tuition doesn't mean I got the right answer or I should get credit when I don't deserve credit. And so
right.
that balance is it's interesting that you're seeing it that way and trying to treat them as customers.
Well, and there's also a mutual accountability, right? I mean, to be a successful student, you are expected to do the work and be prepared and do all these things. And if you don't do that, it's going to be very hard for you to achieve your goal.
Yep.
Right. And yet at the same time, we also have to say this person, has invested a lot of their time and their energy and their money with us. And we have to treat them a certain way because of that, right? We are providing them a service and we have to be sensitive to that.
Yep.
And because we're distributed, we have 700 people around the world. Training those people to manage that complex thing is really tricky. It's really tricky, but it's also one of the more fun things to invest in because it's interesting and it's meaningful. And at the end, the prize at the end of that journey is having this amazing alumni network. And that's the most important thing.
Yep. So I wanted to ask you about New York. How do you see the New York tech ecosystem today? Did you get asked when you were first raising money, why New York? Why don't you go to the Valley? How do you see it today?
It's interesting because first off, we started in New York because we were all in New York. We loved New York and we wanted to be in New York. And New York was where we saw this opportunity, right? And interestingly, the opportunity that we built at GA didn't exist in San Francisco before we built it in New York. So I don't know why that is, but that's just the way it is. What's funny is when we were thinking about what our next market was going to be, everybody assumed it was going to be San Francisco. And almost because that was sort of the easy choice, we decided to go to London because we really wanted to signal to the world that we were thinking globally, not just, the couple big cities in New York. In the United States, New York and San Francisco.
Sure.
Now, San Francisco was I'm glad we opened in San Francisco right after, right? It's been great. It's one of our fastest growing markets and one of our biggest communities. It's awesome. But, I think because I'm an East Coaster, because I'm a bit of a contrarian by nature, San Francisco always kind of made me nervous because it produces amazing companies, but I think it produces those amazing companies through a lot of, what they call creative destruction. There's a lot of insane ideas, big thinking that never amounts to anything, not really grounded in business or unit economics or anything like that. And those are just not my business values. I really want to build over my lifetime meaningfully profitable, sustainable businesses that don't rely on hype, that just exist in the world because they add value to the world.
You want to build a real business.
Yeah. And so, New York is a great place to do that. And if you look at the businesses that are coming out of New York, they all actually at least have positive unit economics. That's what I'll say for that.
You also, there's a great General Assembly campus in LA now in Santa Monica. And so you also got to come back to LA and reconquer the land that scared you.
I did. And it's been a thrill for me, right? Probably the most of all the press and awards that you get as an entrepreneur, which, end up not meaning nearly as much as you think they're going to when you start a company and you imagine about them. The one that probably meant the most was when I was on the Raps list a couple years ago for like one of the most innovative people in Hollywood, which is hilarious because I live in New York. But, for me, that was like
you made the list.
That was my moment of revenge, in a way, for this city that had done me so wrong.
That's great.
I love LA now, and I think it's changed a lot since I was out there. And I also think one thing I learned is that I think I would have been much happier in LA if I had lived at the beach.
Yep. Well, your office is a block from there, so I'm sure you get to spend time there when you come visit.
Beautiful. Yeah.
Final question is, of course, about Donald Trump, because you were one of the people that signed a public letter saying that Trump is an enemy of technological innovation and that his presidency would be detrimental to our economy. Why do you feel that way? And do you feel like GA is in a way educating people and, like you said earlier, making them less likely to be Trump supporters?
Well, yeah, I think more importantly, I think what I think is that one of the biggest roles that our government can do is create thoughtful policies that create the right incentives for individuals, for businesses, for nonprofits, for other government entities. And I think it's complicated work. And I've seen it firsthand now. We work at the state level, at the city level, and at the federal level around what the next generation of education policy is going to be, and how we should sort of fix a lot of the problems that exist in how taxpayer dollars flow towards these sort of inflated student loans and things like that. And so I think at the end of the day, that has a big impact on our economy. And if you're not willing to really embrace that complexity and work through the complexity, it's going to be really hard to make it better. And the odds are it's going to be a lot worse.
Cool. Well, Jake, thank you so much for being on Please Hold. It's been great to have you today.
Hey, anytime, man.
Thanks a lot.
Bye.
Did you like what you just saw? You want to see more? Go ahead and subscribe. We have new episodes every Tuesday. And if there's someone you want to see on the show, just add them as a comment down below. We'll take a look and we'll have them on if we can. Thanks again.